There's been a diplomatic breakthrough after hours of talks in Saudi Arabia between Ukraine and the US, with Ukraine agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire in its war with Russia, and the US saying it'll immediately resume military aid and intelligence sharing with Kyiv. The announcement prompted Donald Trump to invite President Zelensky back to the White House less than 2 weeks after he gave him a very public dressing down. This evening, President Trump, speaking in Washington, said that hopefully President Putin will also agree to the ceasefire, but there's been no direct response yet from Russia. Our first report tonight is from Tom Bateman in the capital of Saudi Arabia, Jeddah.
The talks lasted into the night and ended with a ceasefire proposal far broader than anyone expected, demanded by the Americans and accepted by the Ukrainians. But agreeing a truce plan with only one side won't stop a war.
Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes to peace. The ball is now in their court.
The Americans said they came to see whether Ukraine was committed to President Trump's plan for peace. His top diplomat was trying to change the tone of the last 2 weeks.
Mr. Rubio, your expectations for the meeting today?
It'll be good, he says, giving me a thumbs up. The Ukrainians gathered, badly needing an end to Mr. Trump's freeze on military support, a move the US said was meant to compel them to the table, and so they came with only the warmest of words.
And we're very open, and we want to have very constructive, deep, friend, partners conversation with our American partners.
And then a glimpse of the highest level meeting since ties between these once inseparable friends descended into acrimony, and the moment to see if a broken alliance could be fixed. Tonight, Mr. Zelensky said he welcomed the US truce plan.
The American side understands our arguments, perceives our proposals, and I want to thank President Trump for the constructive conversation between our teams.
No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
That's a thank you the Trump team had angrily demanded in the Oval Office, even though the Ukrainian leader has expressed thanks to the US dozens of times. But the reprieve for this relationship is critical to his country. He was in Saudi Arabia, but not at the talks, in which the US has announced it will immediately reinstate its weapons supply and intelligence sharing with Ukraine.
Ukraine, ceasefire. Ukraine, ceasefire. Just agreed to a little while ago. Now we have to go to Russia and hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road.
The talks at this table lasted more than 8 hours. This is where they arrived at the proposal for an immediate ceasefire. But many in Europe have been deeply concerned about that, about the idea of moving to a quick truce without first negotiating the mechanism to enforce it.
The talks here have grabbed the focus, even as the 3-year war they seek to end intensifies. Mr. Trump's officials will take his plan next to Moscow. A president who wants an immediate ceasefire, but on whose terms? Tom Bateman, BBC News, Jeddah.
Let's go straight to Kyiv and to our correspondent James Waterhouse. And James, what does this agreement mean for Ukraine?
Well, it means, Rita, that Ukraine can draw a welcome line to separate itself from a pretty torrid couple of weeks with its American allies. It means that American aid is unlocked once more. It means that it can continue to defend against Russia's full-scale invasion with the weight of America behind it. That's not to say it solves all of Ukraine's problems. Things are going from bad to worse on some parts of the front line. But, you know, hearing some of the Ukrainian negotiators there, they talked about speaking to partners once more. You heard Marco Rubio talk about the security of the Ukrainian people being central to this deal. And I think now, for the first time since Donald Trump has taken office, we seemingly have an America in Ukraine's corner. It may well be in Russia's corner as well, but it's in Ukraine's corner as it tries to present this ceasefire proposal to Moscow. And this is the big if, the big but. What will happen when Vladimir Putin is presented with this idea? Will he go for it? If he doesn't, this ceasefire proposal falls down. But crucially, with America seemingly aligning with Kyiv for the first time, for the Ukraine, that is something.
James, thank you. James Waterhouse reporting there. Well, President Trump says that he's likely to speak to President Putin this week. And Russia's foreign ministry said tonight that they didn't rule out contact with US representatives. But just hours before the talks in Jeddah took place, Russia was dealing with Ukraine's largest drone attack, including on Moscow, since the beginning of the war. 3 people were killed and 20 injured, including a child. Here's Steve Rosenberg.
Just hours before Ukraine backed a ceasefire, it launched a massive drone attack on Russia, the largest the Moscow region had ever seen. And it left a trail of destruction. There were dead and wounded, and homes shredded. Russia has been pounding Ukraine constantly. But last night, here, it was on the defense. In the south of Moscow, we saw this block of flats that had been struck by a drone. All day long, people stopped and stared, as if they couldn't believe that war had come to their neighborhood. How can this happen in Moscow? Tatiana says. It's outrageous. Don't we have air defenses? Don't they work? But how to respond? Mikhail says, hit the scum harder, meaning Ukraine. No, says Tatiana, this needs to be decided at a political level. Politicians must end this. Not politicians, Mikhail says, but Russia's army. Few Russians foresaw scenes like this 3 years ago. The Kremlin launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the pretext of making Russians safer, more secure. But this kind of thing never used to happen. There were no drone attacks on Russian towns and cities before the war in Ukraine. Before the conflict, Muscovites couldn't imagine their city being a front line. But will Moscow agree to a ceasefire? It's hard to imagine based on the messaging.
The best possible outcome is, of course, total capitulation of Ukraine and Europe. We have to finish this war one way or another, and I hope that what was left of Ukraine would be totally demilitarized and neutralized, and live in peace and not used as a spearhead against Russia.
With these drone attacks, Ukraine's message to Russia is clear. It has no intention of capitulating. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Let's go live to Washington now and to Sarah Smith. And a diplomatic breakthrough in Saudi Arabia, Sarah, but there are so many unanswered questions. Principally, will Russia play ball?
Yeah, and that's, of course, what they're worried about here in the White House. President Trump said this afternoon, rather casually, that he expects to speak to Vladimir Putin sometime soon. And as he put it, it takes 2 to tango, but he hopes to get these ceasefire proposals solidified soon. Now, Donald Trump has set quite a lot of store by this. He has repeatedly said that he is convinced that Russia, that Vladimir Putin, are really serious about a ceasefire and a peace deal. And in many ways, he suspected it was Volodymyr Zelensky and Ukraine who were less serious. That's what that spat in the Oval Office was largely about 10 or 11 days ago. Well, now that Ukraine have put this ceasefire proposal on the table, it is up to Russia whether or not they will agree with it. And of course, up until now, President Trump has been saying things that all sound favourable to Moscow. He's been saying that after some kind of peace deal, Ukraine cannot join NATO, and he's said that Ukraine can't expect to regain all the territory that Russia has seized. Well, now, is he going to be asking Vladimir Putin to accept some things that he doesn't like? Because, for instance, Donald Trump has sounded quite positive about the idea of European peacekeepers in Ukraine after a peace deal's been done. Vladimir Putin won't like that at all. So we're going to see now, with the ball in Russia's court, whether or not they can meet Donald Trump's expectations.